Hi everyone, it's Lara with the MILLA Project. Today I am with Special Agent in Charge Bruce Foucart from the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Bruce, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm the Special Agent in Charge of Homeland Security Investigations, which is part of I.C.E, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is part of the DHS, or Department of Homeland Security. My area of responsibility is all of New England, which is 6 New England states and 6 New England judicial districts as well. I have about 250 employees, of which 190 are special agents. We are involved with investigating and prosecuting cross-border related crimes in Homeland Security investigations in the areas of immigration enforcement as well as in the area of customs enforcement. Some of those investigative disciplines are as follows. In the immigration enforcement side, human trafficking, which is what we're going to talk about today, human smuggling, for example, documents, the illegal passing or manufacture of immigration documents, benefit fraud, immigration benefit fraud, such as marriage fraud, for example, to try to gain access to the United States legally, gang suppression or gang enforcement by way of transnational gang members. For example, someone who's out of status, who may be involved with gang activity, will utilize our administrative authority in that particular area. In the area of customs enforcement, we investigate narcotics trafficking, smuggling into the United States, again, a cross-border crime, money laundering as it relates generally to overseas financial transaction, the illegal dissemination of child pornography on the internet, or child exploitation crimes. We're also involved with intellectual property rights investigations, which relate to trademark violations, for example, in the area of Rolex, for example. This is just an example with watches, for example. There'll be countries or criminal organizations in other countries that will make knockoff or counterfeit products and sell them in the United States at much less value. Those are the types of crimes we investigate and we're
That's
involved in as
illegal?
well. It is illegal. It is.
I think I've bought one of those bags
No,
before.
it takes away from Americans and jobs and the companies that are doing the right thing. And it happens not only in the area of merchandise, entertainment, for example, DVDs, pirating, Hollywood movies, for example. So it's everywhere, and it also involves potential hazardous materials. For example, electrical plugs, things that aren't made to the United States specifications can be dangerous in the household.
Huh.
And then finally, exportation crimes involving like the United States State Department, weaponry, technology has to be licensed before it leaves the United States to go to another country. Obviously, there are unscrupulous people out there who are willing to contact the manufacturer and try to have that exported without a proper license.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, if that gets in the wrong hands, a country that wants to do harm to the United States, that can be very detrimental, or our allies, for example. So those are pretty much the investigative disciplines that we investigate and bring forward for prosecution.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So our focus of this webcast today will be about human trafficking and your role in assisting victims.
Sure.
So I have some questions for you, and hopefully you'll be able to answer all of them.
Sure.
And if you have anything else that you want to add along the way, feel free.
Okay.
So my first question is, the MILLA Project works domestically and internationally.
Mhm.
In America, we primarily focus on domestic violence and human trafficking. And I understand that the Department of Homeland Security protects victims of violence and human trafficking. This is something that I just found out because I actually thought you were just focusing on terrorism. So is it true that you actually assist victims of violence?
As it relates to human trafficking. Now, if it's just a simple domestic violence type of scenario, that's generally an investigation that will be done by state and local police officers.
Okay.
And brought to prosecution at that level. But if anyone in the United States, whether they be illegally in the United States or a United States citizen,
Mm-hmm.
Or, for example, a green card holder who is put against their will in any type of fraud, any type of force, any type of coercion, for example, prostitution, for example, peonage, sweatshop labor, for example. If those people are being coerced against their will, if they're not free to go, that's human trafficking. And we want those people to come forward and let us know that if they can, that they're being trafficked in the United States. The hardest thing in these cases is for people to come out of the shadows and report this against their abusers. And what we do, or what we can offer, specifically if someone is in the United States illegally, is particular immigration benefits. If they will help us go after the criminal organization or go after the human traffickers and help us prosecute them. One of the things we'll offer is a deferred action, or an ability for that person to remain in the United States legally while they're helping us go after or prosecute or investigate those coercers or the human traffickers. They have the ability to apply for a T visa. And the T visa allows them to remain in the United States for, I believe, 3 to 4 years. And at the end, and it doesn't depend on the outcome, meaning it doesn't matter if that person was positively or he was prosecuted to the fullest extent, that person can still adjust their status to green card holders.
Okay.
But what they need to do, the criteria for them, is to cooperate with us, meaning provide us as much information they can against whoever's trafficking against them. What we try not to do is re-victimize anyone who's been victimized. So I have specific trained agents out there who are trained in victim witness questions or eliciting information from victims. And so these people are trained not to re-victimize the people who have been abused. The other thing that we'll never do is put that person's name out publicly anywhere. Anything that they provide as far as assistance will be held confidential. We also work with non-governmental organizations that will provide them with a shelter, for example, a roof over their heads, food, clothing, while they're in the United States, and while they're helping us cooperate, while they're cooperating with us to bring the prosecution forward. But again, the end game in this thing is for us to get a successful prosecution against these criminal organizations.
Okay.
For the abused, is to get them out of these situations. They should not be held in these situations whatsoever, and we want them away from that. And if they are illegally in the United States, they should not be afraid to come forward and help us. They will not be deported because they're bringing this information forward to us.
Okay.
Bringing this information forward to us allows us to help them with their immigration status and their benefits, and allows us to go after the people who are abusing them or trafficking with them.
Okay, so I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
You mentioned sweatshops.
Yes.
So let me give you an example of something that I've seen. There are restaurants that are ethnic restaurants. So I'm just gonna, let's say Chinese food restaurant. And sometimes they employ illegal people and provide housing. Strangely enough, it's under, like an example would be under a restaurant.
Yeah, we find that all the time.
Okay,
Yes.
so many people live under this restaurant, and they work like 15 hours or more a day. They have undesirable or even like inhumane living conditions.
Sure.
Is that a sweatshop?
Well,
And
a couple things here. In this particular scenario that you gave, if they're free to leave, if they're not being forced to work 15 hours a day, and many times they are. For example, if they're brought into the United States, they have to pay off generally huge debts to their smugglers. And oftentimes they will be trafficked until they pay those debts off. But if it doesn't rise to the level of coercion or forced labor, in other words, if they're just going to work and punching the ticket and then going home, and they can leave and they can travel up the country or go wherever they want to go, that's not human trafficking. But the mere fact that these people who are bringing them into the United States and harboring them and putting them in these situations we can charge what's called transportation, illegal transportation of illegal aliens, and harboring. In the scenario you just mentioned, they can be charged with harboring people who are in the United States illegally. But the key point of this is, does it rise to the level of human trafficking? If someone is free to go in your scenario, no. Then the answer to that is no. They can still be charged, now, the people who are doing this. But those other things that I just mentioned, but it may not be human trafficking.
Could the victim still receive assistance, some kind of assistance, or that would be dependable on like knowing more about the circumstance?
Yeah, we have people who cooperate with investigations all the time, and there are methods that like a deferred action, for example, in which we can keep them in the United States while they help us with a particular criminal investigation. Yes,
Okay.
There is some help that we can provide, but everything's on a case-by-case basis, and it depends. Will that person be willing to, say, go to trial and be a witness at trial and help us with the prosecution? That may be necessary, for example. So each case is different and the circumstances vary. But certainly in a trafficking scenario, a trafficking situation, we definitely want to help them along their way, keeping them in the United States, keeping their presence in the United States legally, and then having them adjust with a T visa, hopefully to an LPR status or a lawful permanent resident status, which is a green card status,
Okay.
as long as they're cooperating and continuing with helping us.
Okay, so I have a question on free to leave.
Yeah.
Free to leave meaning they can have their documents, no harm will come to them, or, I mean, sometimes people use force that's not necessarily like physical threats. Like, so can you tell me a little bit, like, if I'm not free to leave if I want to get my paycheck, like if I leave and I come back and I know I'm not going to get my paycheck, I'm not really free to leave. Like, or is somebody going to come and hunt me down? Are they threatening that they're going to turn me in? Like that's a threat, but it's not physical. And that would keep me in a location.
One of the problems with trying to successfully investigate and prosecute a human trafficking case is the victim has been coached by the abuser, by the person that's trafficking in them. Oftentimes they don't speak English. They've been coached to say that if they do come forward with information, their loved ones will be harmed back in their home country. They've been forced to, sometimes coached to say certain things. Obviously, they're going to use my agency, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as a tool against them. For example, they'll say, if you do go to the authorities, the first thing that we're going to tell them is that you're illegally in the United States, and they're going to remove you back to your home country.
Yeah.
So there is, that's a form of force and coercion. But each circumstance is different, and we have to weigh a bunch of different factors. For example, we had a scenario not too long ago in which a woman came forward who indicated that she had started off as almost like a nanny, taking care of a rich family's family, a rich person's family, and I won't mention what country they're from, but it was a transnational, it was a country from outside the United States, and they brought her over, and she looked after the children in the house. She came forward and said, I'm being held against my will, and she wasn't from the same country, actually. She was actually from the Philippines. I'm being held against my will. They won't pay me. I have to do this, this, and this on a regular basis. And so we looked into it and we investigated it with the local police department. And sometimes that just means following them and seeing, is this woman free to go and stuff. And what we did find out in this scenario was she was free to go, and she was going to the bank, for example, on a regular basis. She was taking her paycheck. She was getting paid. She was wiring it back to her family members back in her home country. It didn't rise to the level. She wasn't being trafficked. She could have gone at any time. There was no force. She was getting paid. There was no force for her to be there to work off a debt, for example. So in that scenario, it didn't rise to the level of human trafficking. And sometimes, and I'm not saying all the time, but in this particular scenario, the woman felt that she was being trafficked, and she felt that she wanted to gain these benefits what I just mentioned. So it's up to us to objectively look at a situation to see whether or not there actually is trafficking. I've had other cases in which a rich family member has brought over an indentured servant and they weren't able to leave. They kept them in their basement. They weren't paying them. And they came forward with information and they were being trafficked. And they are now being assisted by these non-governmental organizations, these charities, and we are going forward with a prosecution against the human trafficker.
Mm-hmm.
So it varies. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to look at each scenario objectively to see what the circumstances or what the facts are for each case.
Yeah. So, and I hear you saying that even if you aren't 100% sure whether or not you're going to be deemed a victim of human trafficking, to come forward.
Yes.
Just come forward and talk about what your experience is so that you can receive some kind of assistance.
Yeah.
Just come forward. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, and as far as the assistance part goes, there's certainly these charities are out there, and I'm sure they assist, even folks that aren't being human trafficked.
MILLA Project does. We do.
Exactly. So there is assistance that's being provided. Absolutely. Does it mean that we can give them that T visa? It doesn't. We need to ensure that that there's been trafficking involved, B, that they're going to help us with the prosecution of their abusers or their human traffickers. Mm-hmm. But along with that, we make sure that they get all the benefits that come along with that.
Right. And there are NGOs out there that assist with immigration, that work with immigration attorneys. Sure. That can help these people who didn't qualify for the UV or VAWA visas get some kind of status. So they would just have to go through an attorney versus the government. It's not an end-all be-all if you end up not being a victim.
Right.
So just there are other options.
There are. Okay. Right. And it's a significant point to say that someone that comes forward, even if it's questionable if they're being trafficked or not, is not a priority of my agencies to take that person and remove them. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that each and every time that's the case. For example, there may be a scenario where that person may be wanted back in his or her home country for crimes, for example, that they committed back then, and we will cooperate with the host government. But minus any type of circumstance like that, they are not a priority for ours. We want people to come forward and report crimes that are happening in their communities or against them. We want them to do that.
Okay. So a little bit more about the qualifications of human trafficking. Do you have to cross international borders? Can you enter the country with a valid visa and then it expires? Are those do those components have to be there in order to be considered human trafficking, or it can be without international crossing of borders?
Well, if we're talking about just being trafficked, no, absolutely not. Okay. You don't have to cross international borders. Oftentimes we'll see United States citizens that are trafficked, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. You may have young children, unfortunately, put into prostitution. And those sexual exploitation type crimes where sometimes it raises to the level of human trafficking, and they're United States citizens. Mm-hmm. And human trafficking can be charged. Generally, when we get involved with DHS, with HSI and I.C.E, we're dealing with transnational figures, cross-border related crimes to begin with. That's kind of the genesis of what we get involved with. Not to say that we wouldn't take any type of case with a human trafficking, because human trafficking is a priority for our agency. It just so happens that those are the types of crimes that we're generally involved with.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so I really wanted to focus on a little bit more of if the victim comes forward with maybe trafficking or some different type of crime, it turns out that the Department of Homeland Security isn't able to prosecute the bad guy. Do you deport the person that comes forward? Do you harass them, give them any kind of trouble? What really can the victim expect if it turns out there's no crime committed? Are you going to deport them?
Well, first of all, we don't harass people.
I'm just wondering.
No, I know. I mean, we don't do that.
Okay.
I mean, this agency and the agents that work for me and for HSI are professional, and we're professional, and the priority is dealing with anyone in the public. Neither it doesn't matter if they're victims, witnesses, even if they're crooks. We're going to deal with everyone professionally. We're never going to harass anyone. But that being said, getting back to your question, to enjoy the benefits of those immigration benefits that I mentioned before, the continued presence in the United States, the T visa, and then potentially getting a green card, you don't have to have a successful prosecution.
Okay.
You don't have to have it. But that person needs to have been trafficked. Now, that being said, even if he or she wasn't trafficked, again, as I mentioned earlier, they're not going to be a priority of this agency unless they had a criminal record and they are removable from the United States. They're undesirable. They're a public safety threat, for example. They're a national security threat. And all of those are on a case-by-case basis. But minus that, the scenario that you brought forward, they're not going to be a priority of ours to deport from the United States.
Okay. I'm just going to ask this because I know people want me to ask this. I'm assuming the Department of Homeland Security is very busy. So I'm going to say 99% of the time you are preoccupied with other things, and that's why that victim is not a priority to deport, or lack of victim, since they were deemed not a victim. That 1% of the time when you guys are bored, then would they be a priority, or no? Like, it's just really like
No.
threats to the United States, like people who.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, well, first of all, there's never any boredom within the agency.
I know.
We're always constantly busy protecting the United States and working abroad. But, our priorities are laid out by the senior members of our agency. For example, Director Morton, John Morton is our director, and he actually put out what our priorities are back in 2011, I believe May of 2011, which will give you an example of what our priorities are. Public safety and national security threats. People who have recently entered the United States, for example, as well as the third part is
individuals who evaded the immigration.
Yeah, people who have warrants of deportation, who have gone through the immigration system,
Okay.
and they've actually been ordered removed by a judge, an immigration judge, so they've had their due process.
Mhm.
Those would be people who have, to maintain the integrity of the immigration system, people who were ordered removed and failed to do so. Those would be a priority to have them removed as well. But first and foremost, it's public safety and national security threats.
Okay. And for the third part, it's just simply you enforcing a court order by removing somebody who's already gone through the due process and
Exactly.
has a court order to be removed.
To be removed.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So can you walk me through an example of a true victim of human trafficking? Do they have to sit in a room with the trafficker and maybe you and tell the story? I mean, what happens?
What are the safeguards?
Yeah.
Well, again, what we don't want to do is re-victimize the victim. We try to stay so far away from that as possible. Now, will there ever be a scenario during a criminal prosecution in which the abuser has to face the abusee in court? That's a possibility. I mean,
Okay.
that is something that the judge would rule on. But until that happens, more than likely, no.
Okay.
We're talking about time of trial.
Mhm.
So, getting back to our professional victim witness coordinators who are going to do the interviews, not going to re-victimize, the NGOs that are going to help them on a regular basis get back on their feet, try to get them a job, get these services for them. There's no victim, there's no abuser in there.
Mhm.
If at any time that the abusee is harassed, as you used the word before, by the abuser, that needs to be brought forward, and we'll work with our state and local people to if that person isn't in custody, to immediately get him in custody, get a court order, the domestic order,
Mhm.
so that they can't be near that person, for example.
Okay.
oftentimes they may already have been charged. The trafficker may already been charged and may be in court. I mean, may be in custody, excuse me. If that person's out on bail, believe me, the protection of the victim is paramount.
Okay.
So that is something that we're going to make sure that they are not re-abused by that abuser.
And do you have victim advocates in your organization?
We do. Well, victim advocates, we have victim witness coordinators that have been professionally trained on interviewing techniques
Okay.
to elicit as much information as they can from the victim. And we have agents who will bring that information forward to the U.S. Attorney's Office, United States Attorney's Office, and the Department of Justice for prosecution. So, yeah, that's what we have. And at the headquarters level, we have more people that are involved more specifically with victims and deal with victims' rights. And we work with our DOJ partners, Department of Justice partners, and the Civil Rights Division, for example. And so, it's not only just within DHS, within all of the federal government. We all leverage our resources and work together.
Okay.
Yep.
And I guess our final question is, if there was one thing that you can tell the victims, regardless of citizenship or status, what would you say to them?
And it's so difficult, and we realize this for a number of different reasons, but to come out of the shadows and bring the information forward. We do not want to see these crimes going on in the United States or anywhere around the world. That's the downside of this of human trafficking is, I forget the statistics, but they believe at any given time almost 20 million people around the world are being trafficked. We don't want to see that anywhere, but certainly not in the United States, which is under our jurisdiction or under our purview. So come forward with the information. We realize it's difficult to get the victims to come forward, but that's the point that I want to drive home. Come forward to us. Come forward to the state and locals if you have that opportunity. Anytime you have an opportunity to talk to law enforcement, tell them, I'm being abused, I'm being trafficked, please, contact ICE, whatever. They saw the webinar, for example. HSI, they're interested in these types of cases. Bring them to our attention. And the state and local law enforcement, they know who we are. I mean, we work well with them, and they're the eyes and ears of the community. And so they'll know who to contact. Absolutely.
I noticed on your website you do have a number for victims of human trafficking to call. So I think that goes through the National Human Trafficking
Center.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's a good way
That's
to
a good
report
way.
it. Also, 911. Can they call 911?
Sure.
Can they call their local Department of Homeland Security ICE division?
Sure. And we have a tip line
Okay.
as well. I believe it's 1-866-2, the number 2, DHS ICE. And they can report crimes that way.
Okay.
And so however they can get that information to us, if it means, a family member, if they're allowed to talk to a family member back in host country, and that they can call the tip line and let us know. And so that'll filter down to us. And again, it's a huge priority of us, of HSI and DHS, to work these types of cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
That concludes the questions for today. But since I'm sitting here with you, I can't let this opportunity go. So I'm going to ask if you would be interested in doing either another webcast like this or a live webinar regarding profiling.
Racial profiling?
Racial profiling.
Sure.
You would do it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I've done several of these panels as well. And what we could do is get some of the other federal agencies involved, like TSA, for example, or Customs and Border Protection, other DHS agencies. I'm sure that they'd be willing to talk about it as well.
Okay. So we're going to set that up.
You put me on the record.
Okay, good. All right, everyone. That concludes today's webcast. I hope that you have benefited and that the victims out there understand that it's safe to come forward. You can always contact me at the MILLA Project, and I will help you no matter where you are in the world. And I will put all of our numbers, of course, underneath the YouTube video and on the Facebook. So I guess you're going to be hearing from me regarding our new webinar regarding racial profiling. So I'll keep you up to date on that. Thank you. And thank you. This was fun. I had a lot of fun doing this.
You're welcome.